Hello everyone and welcome to your weekly news recap. We are your hosts Jacob Smith
and Matt Morgans,
here to break down some of the biggest and most interesting stories of the week in the gaming industry. As usual, we're always looking to answer audience questions and implement audience feedback, so if you have any of either, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below. But without further ado, let's jump right into it with some interesting news regarding Sony and Microsoft's collaborations. I know, that's kind of a weird sentence because you think, especially amidst the impending console war with the next generation, you'd think that they'd be at odds.
Absolutely.
But interestingly enough, they've chosen to announce their cooperation with each other regarding Microsoft's Azure program. Azure, whichever. Microsoft's Azure program, which is essentially a cloud service. And that is really interesting because while we don't know the intricacies of this deal, we can tell it's obviously looking into the future of streaming games, of cloud games as a service. What do you think about all this, Matt? I mean, like I said, we don't really know a lot of the details surrounding the terms of their agreement, but the fact that they're willing to work together is huge in and of itself.
Yeah, we've never really seen them work together on a project like this before.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly on issues like, for example, it's gone out of my head. The word for allowing multiple consoles to communicate on the same network. Cross-platform.
Cross-platform. There we go.
That's the one. It's early where I am. But yes, no, they've been kind of famously at odds on that particular topic for quite some time, and certainly with a new console generation kind of coming along, I wouldn't have expected to see them cooperating on something like this.
No, not at all. And what's interesting about the cross-platform, reticence to cooperate is that that was kind of entirely based around Sony's own hesitation, and the fact that they're now coming forward and saying, no, we're willing to work with Microsoft on this, on their Azure platform, is really interesting. And Azure is a really basic platform that a lot of people hadn't heard about. I hadn't heard about until this news broke. It's just a public cloud computing platform. It provides a range of cloud services, including those for compute analytics, storage, and networking. So really basic stuff, but obviously this is what they're looking forward to the future to implement in their gaming services. And I thought that was really interesting. I don't know what Sony could be up to, what they could possibly have their hand in for a Microsoft-based platform. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it definitely kind of indicates maybe that they're anticipating more of a cooperative relationship going into the next generation, at least when it comes to perhaps the infrastructure behind the consoles. The kind of online functionality that's going to be backing up the equivalent to something like PSN or Xbox Live on this new generation. And I'm certain that both companies are looking at things like the Google Stadia announcement, and whether or not that's something that is going to come along anytime soon. Google does have an awful lot of money, and certainly the indication that another company might be getting into their market might be enough to get Microsoft and Sony to sort of band together temporarily, if only to kind of shore up some of their infrastructure going forward. Bit of a case of enemy of my enemy.
Absolutely. Like you said, Google has a lot of money to throw at this. Apple, who's just really announced Apple Arcade, has got a lot of money to throw at this. So they
Absolutely.
really could be banding together in the face of some new competition. It's going to be exciting to see, and interesting more than anything to see where they take this. But in other news regarding some unstable and unworkable conditions, CD Projekt Red has been in the news recently. And, over the last couple months of some reports of crunch at their studio, especially as Cyberpunk 2077 development really ramps up in these coming months. And their CEO and co-founder has recently made some statements ensuring the public assuring the public that they will ensure stable working conditions for their developers. They've committed to more humane, quote unquote, more humane working conditions, amidst these reports of crunch. And in an interview with Kotaku, co-founder Marcin Iwinski, probably butchered that, I'm so sorry, has assured the public that they're instating non-mandatory overtime in order to cultivate a more respectful environment for their developers. What do you think? Do you think that's enough to really ensure the safety and sanity of the development team?
Well, I hope it is. I mean, we won't really know for certain, probably until after the game comes out, whether it really has proven to be enough. I think this is the right approach for CD Projekt Red to take. The CEO did say that it was a more humane approach, specifically, and I think that's right. It's not, you don't want to be in a position where you're forcing your staff to work enormous amounts of overtime just to kind of fit into the schedule that you're having to work in. That really indicates that the schedule is not actually giving you enough time if your staff are having to work enormous amounts of overtime. So yeah, I think this is a good indication that they're putting staff ahead of some sort of executive schedule, and that's definitely good. Whether it is enough, I don't know. At the end of the day, the problem of crunch is a problem that is kind of endemic to the industry, and CD Projekt Red on its own can't necessarily kind of change the way the entire industry works. The way that games are developed, crunch does sort of happen as a natural consequence. So I'm sure there are things you can do earlier on in development when they're planning and so on that might mitigate the issues of crunch, but I'm also sure that there are all manner of things that you don't plan for that'll come up in game development, and so all of that makes crunch a bit more likely. So I think
absolutely
the best approach is to just kind of manage it as effectively as possible without sacrificing the kind of the needs of the staff in exchange for focusing purely on profit and targets.
Absolutely, and in the article, Jason Schreier kind of alluded to the fact that they might be reaching out to make these public statements in order to get ahead of some issues regarding employee leaks about working conditions, and I think that's smart from a business perspective, and I hope these implementations are genuine and affect genuine change, instead of just being surface level, hey, we're making this announcement to cover our own butts. So
certainly.
We'll definitely see as time goes on and as more reports are certain to come out closer to 2077's release. But in other news regarding other studios, Ubisoft has reported an earning of over $2 billion from the year 2018, which is not a small number.
No, not at all.
This is due mostly thanks to their flagship franchises, being, of course, Assassin's Creed and Far Cry. They have, of course, sold millions of dollars and millions of copies in their own right, in their own first week of sales, respectfully. So how much do you think Ubisoft is really planning on riding on these franchises going forward?
I think Ubisoft, for a long time, they've been a studio defined by their franchises. They're a very franchise-heavy studio. That they aren't afraid to occasionally kind of step outside of the bounds of their kind of established franchises, but I think it's rare for them to do it, and when they have the opportunity to do something new, that I feel like they're more likely to do something new in an existing franchise than go and make an entirely new IP. Definitely. Certainly if you look at things like the more recent Assassin's Creeds or even Far Cry to some extent, there's been some significant structural changes, or they've changed the way that they're approaching story. I mean, the latest Assassin's Creed was a total kind of redesign of the Assassin's Creed format to include RPG elements and all things like that. So they're not afraid of taking risks and making changes, but I think they're aware of the potential of good branding, and they certainly have that in spades.
Yeah, absolutely, and it was reported in an earnings call last week that were on par with their projection of 17% growth from 2017. So their investors are happy, and of course your investors are happy as a public company. That's pretty much your only goal.
Absolutely.
Monetarily, but that also comes with the idea that they might start setting their expectations a little too high, and we've seen kind of the dangerous route that can lead, especially with companies like big companies, multi-billion-dollar companies like EA and Activision, who just after reporting that their games kind of undersold by their standards, which were, albeit outrageously high, when their game is undersold, they had to, well, quote unquote, induce layoffs across their company-wide layoffs, in different countries around the world, in different layers of their company. But still, do you think we could see this kind of behavior, this kind of trend following over to Ubisoft, following another really big year for them?
I think it's a risk, especially as their company kind of grows into, they're already one of the largest gaming companies, but as they grow even larger, there is that kind of, that separation between the executives who are making big, high-level decisions and the developers kind of on the ground. You've got more and more middle management between those two factors.
Yeah.
And less appreciation of what's going on the ground from the people up top. So certainly, the latest Assassin's Creed did incredibly well. It was very well reviewed, but the latest Far Cry was not exactly so well performing.
Yeah.
It got fairly mediocre reviews. Sales were fine, but not kind of out and out stellar. And certainly the review consensus was that it really wasn't up to the par that had been set by previous core titles. Now, at the end of the day, it was kind of a spin-off title, so
yeah.
I don't think anyone was expecting it to be this sort of huge thing on par with the previous Far Cries.
Certainly not.
But still, there was a decent amount of complaint about the storyline from fans and from critics, and that definitely hurt their sales to some extent. Not least because they released, I think, literally on the same day as Metro Exodus, which got really, really positive reviews.
Yeah, kind of paled in comparison upon release. But I think it's something to look out for. Obviously, Ubisoft is a pretty well-loved publisher, but that could easily change if their motives shift primarily to profits and greed. I don't think anyone has a problem with them keeping their core franchises and flagship IPs really at the forefront of their marketing and of their development. That just makes sense. But as soon as they place that emphasis too high and too high above the quality of their games or standards of employment, I think that's when we really have to start to worry. But we'll see what the future holds for Ubisoft. It's gonna be interesting, to say the least. But in other kind of interesting news and unexpected news, frankly, Netflix has announced their intention to host a panel at E3. It looks like that is going to happen, which is not something I expected at all.
No.
I think next to Sony backing out of the conference, this is some of the bigger news to come out ahead of E3. And they basically released a short little statement saying that they will be doubling down on their independent properties, such as Stranger Things, by producing games for them, fully fledged titles. So far what we've seen of their Stranger Things game looks really cool, and they've indicated that there is yet more yet to come. So Matt, what do you think Netflix could be going for here by making this big announcement?
Well, it's a very interesting move. Looking at Netflix's business model, it's not entirely surprising. I don't think anyone was really thinking of this as a move for them to make, but looking at it in the context of what they've been doing, it does make a sort of sense. Netflix has really been sort of setting itself apart as an independent content production, beast.
Yeah.
They severed their ties with Disney and Marvel, most likely due to the upcoming launch of Disney's own rival
Disney Plus, their own streaming service, yeah.
And since they dropped all of the Marvel stuff, they seem to have been focusing more and more on getting their own sort of new IPs and things like that together. But at the end of the day, they've always been fairly cutting edge when it comes to new technology, and I think it was only a matter of time before a company that large started to move into the gaming sphere, whether that was actually in terms of content development or simply just licensing their properties. Because I mean, a company like that, they've really invested a lot of time in not only making shows about existing IPs, but really going out of their way to make entirely new IPs, and that gives them a lot of intellectual property to license for things like games.
Yeah, absolutely, and I know that they've been looking for ways over the years, as basically everyone gets a Netflix subscription, and not everyone is, not many new people are signing on, that they've been looking for new ways to generate revenue. And I think gaming and licensing out their independent properties and publishing games is a really smart way to do that, especially if gaming does move into a more streaming-based kind of platform, as
Certainly.
a lot of companies are trying to make happen. As we mentioned, Google Stadia is a really big one that's trying to make that happen. So if those platforms become more widely accessible, who knows what Netflix could possibly have in store. But that's all coming up this E3. We'll get to find out what they're going to present to us, along with some other things. Matt, what are you expecting from some of the more flagship franchises that we expect to see at E3, namely, Cyberpunk, Ghost Recon, all that stuff? What are you most anticipating this E3?
Well, Cyberpunk is definitely going to be the headline. We know that they're going to have a big appearance. They've said it's going to be their biggest appearance ever, and with the hype that's surrounding that game, I think CD Projekt Red is wise enough to prepare something to match. So I'd be very surprised if anything tops the Cyberpunk demonstration, or whatever they decide to show at E3. Beyond that, to be honest, there's a lot of things that we're not going to see. We know now that we are not going to see anything from Elder Scrolls 6. We're not going to see anything from Starfield, which really doesn't leave Bethesda with much to show. I mean, in all likelihood, we'll probably see some stuff for the upcoming Fallout 76 DLC. We'll probably see some stuff for Elder Scrolls Blades, but that's not a huge thing for them.
No, certainly.
We'll probably see some things for Elder Scrolls Online coming out of ZeniMax, but again, that's not a huge kind of AAA property. One thing that we definitely will be seeing a lot of, I'm sure, is going to be Ghost Recon Breakpoint.
Yeah, definitely.
With their sort of slightly ahead of schedule announcement, I'm sure they have a pretty big schedule packed for E3, and of course the other big thing is going to be Borderlands 3. They've been showing a ton of stuff ahead of schedule, so I'm sure they've got a whole lot planned. I mean, although they have shown a lot so far, what they've mainly focused on is gameplay. They really haven't shown much at all of any kind of dialogue or story. So I would be very surprised if we didn't see some sort of big story trailer or a focus more on the kind of witty Borderlands dialogue that people kind of expect from the game that we haven't really seen much of yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, E3 is the perfect place for them to get all that information out, as to a wide an audience as possible.
The other thing, which unfortunately we're not going to see, which might explain why Ghost Recon Breakpoint has kind of seemed to dominate Ubisoft's pre-event marketing, is that we're not going to see Skull and Bones, which is their sort of a new IP in the sense that it's a spin-off from Assassin's Creed. They announced it a few years ago, and it was originally meant to come out in 2018. Sort of essentially a dedicated game built on the ship mechanics from Assassin's Creed 3 and Black Flag.
That's right.
A really interesting game, certainly for people who enjoyed those ship mechanics, which I certainly did. I've been really interested to see more of Skull and Bones, but it was delayed into this year, during the course of last year, and we now know in this latest earnings call where Ubisoft revealed that they'd made $2 billion in profits, that while that may be the case, Skull and Bones is being delayed again into at least early 2020, and moreover, it's not going to be at E3 at all.
Shame on both accounts.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to tell. They didn't give a reason as to why it's being delayed, so we don't know if it's stuck in development, if there's other issues that are kind of bringing things to a halt, or it could just be that Ubisoft's moving its schedule around. They've got Breakpoint coming out, and the Assassin's Creed has performed very well. It's possible that we may see a teaser for the next sort of fully fledged Far Cry game this E3. And perhaps something for Assassin's Creed as well. And with more content coming out for Rainbow Six, potentially more content being shown for For Honor. They've got a pretty packed roster. And with all of that performing fairly well, it may be the case that they don't want to take a risk on a new IP that people are not going to sort of know the name of quite yet.
That's fair.
Especially in terms of releasing it into a packed late 2019 release window against things like Cyberpunk 2077, if it does indeed release in that window, and other big titles that are going to come out later this year.
Yeah.
I think if they're pushing it to early 2020, that is a more sensible release window.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope this isn't indicative of a greater problem involved with Skull and Bones, because it seems like a really interesting premise. And I like when Ubisoft dips their toes into new IP. Like when For Honor dropped, obviously it had its flaws. Obviously it had its problems. But it ended up being a really cool, unique game. I want to see them be able to expand on more of that and let their studios really generate some new IPs. But you know what I'm really excited for, Matt? And I'm looking forward to is Nintendo. Nintendo has kind of alluded to their plans a little bit this E3, and God, they've got some great potential here. They've got Ultimate Alliance 3, Black Order on the docket. They have Fire Emblem, Three Houses on the docket. They've got potential Pokemon information, and fingers crossed we see something Animal Crossing this E3, because we have been chomping at the bit since that little teaser they announced early last year, and since then it's been radio silence. Do you think Nintendo will be doing anything regarding the rumored new Switch models as well?
Indeed, I think if they're going to, if those rumors are true that they're going to be bringing out more kind of alternate versions of the Switch, I think E3 is the perfect time to announce them. In general, their audience tends to be something of a sort of closed system. Like they have a good marketing system towards their audience, but it tends to be the Nintendo audience that they communicate directly with. You don't see them like really reaching a wider audience. So E3 is, I think, a good opportunity for them to kind of reach the wider audience, reach the kind of console audience that are more used to seeing things from Xbox and PlayStation, and sort of be shown that there's alternate versions of the Switch if they haven't been convinced to switch over to that console already.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's something to be said for them making a big announcement outside of like a Nintendo Direct, something that really only reaches their core fan base. It's the chance for them to reach a much broader audience. I think that's probably what they would want to do if they were announcing a new Switch model, or maybe two, as has been kind of the rumor. But I'm excited for E3. I know that you are, and I think as we get closer, as we hear more details, we'll only have more speculation and more to talk about regarding the show and the conferences.
I'd just mention as well that as we get nearer to the show, I'd recommend people to stay tuned to VGR, because the closer we get to the show, the more interview requests we get sent through, and the more interviews I have to do a huge amount of work for. So I can say that we've already got a few in the works that will be coming up in the next few weeks, kind of people wanting to get interviews done ahead of the event, especially from the somewhat smaller studios who are maybe not all that confident that they're going to get top billing at E3. E3 tends to really focus attention on the big AAA titles, the ones that really dominate the headlines.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of other games at E3 that aren't going to get those headline billings. And, when you're a developer in that kind of level, we're not even talking about indie developers. We're talking about just, run-of-the-mill developers who are just not the huge studios.
Yeah.
So it's that level of company that are now looking for opportunities to get news out, either before or after the event, because they know they're not going to get the same kind of attention during the event itself.
Absolutely.
So I can say we've got I think 3 or 4 interviews currently in process of going through. And I know we've got a whole load of requests sitting in various inboxes, so there'll be plenty more coming up in the near future.
Awesome. Well, you heard it. You heard Matt. Don't let his hard work be in vain. Go check out all our cool exclusive interviews before E3. And please, during the conference, don't sleep on Devolver Digital. They need your love too. And to kind of round things out for the week, Matt, you've got some stuff regarding Three Kingdoms, the highly anticipated release from Creative Assembly, the next Total War game. Please tell me all about it.
Yes, so a bit of roundup news. So the game is now officially, I think it's about a week, or just under a week away from release. I think it was a week a couple of days ago. And they released a launch trailer. They finally featured Liu Bei in a trailer. Along with Guan Yu and Zhang Fei. So it's great to see them actually in a trailer. They've kind of focused on characters with each trailer, and people have been waiting for them to do Liu Bei, and they finally did it. We're now just a few days away. The Creative Assembly is now live streaming the game every single day. They're not going over the weekend, but every work day they're streaming kind of middle of the day British time. And that's all available on their YouTube channel, which is Total War Live. I've been watching them. It's a really, really interesting series, getting to see the game. We actually already have it, but but still getting to see people who've been playing it for a long time and who are very experienced with it. And actually on that topic, we were fortunate enough to get a review copy from Creative Assembly. Obviously we did do interviews with them last month. So fortunately through that connection we were able to get a review copy. And actually if you check the VGR YouTube channel, if you've not already seen it, we did actually put up a gameplay commentary video yesterday.
Yes indeed.
Well, when this video comes out, it won't have been yesterday. It will have been a few days ago.
At the time of this recording.
At the time of this recording, it was yesterday. And that is about an hour and a quarter of me playing through a bit of Total War Three Kingdoms. And that's going to be part 1, and we're going to be doing some more. In fact, we are probably going to go straight from this into recording a bit together and actually get both of us into a video.
Yeah, it sounds like that's the plan. But I'm excited for everything that's coming down the pipe regarding Total War. As release date gets closer, I know you'll have a lot more content coming out on VGR. And a lot more video content.
I should mention as well that as we go forward to the series, I'm writing an article every single day, continuing a series I was doing a few months ago on the lore behind the historical characters who feature in Three Kingdoms. I wrote over a dozen of these articles sort of earlier this year up to the original release date, and then when that release date got delayed, there were other things that came up and it kind of fell by the wayside. So with a week left, I resurrected the series and I'm doing an article every day, which was a commitment that I maybe should have thought a bit more about before making. But certainly it is very interesting. So I've done articles now for Sima Yi and Sun Ce, and I have at least 5 more. Although there's so many characters that I might have to do a few extra.
So many, and it feels like such a little time until release date. So far away, yet so close. We can just taste it. But
Yeah.
that's a lot of exciting news regarding Total War. If you need to get your Total War fix, head over to the YouTube channel, head over to VGR, because there is a plethora of content to dig through regarding Creative Assembly's latest release. But that is going to do it for us this week. Thank you so much, as usual, for tuning in. Your support and your viewership is so greatly appreciated.
Absolutely.
Again, we're always looking for audience feedback and ways to implement positive changes to the show. So if you have any of those, any suggestions, any thoughts, please leave them in the comments below. You can find these articles, these stories, and more all at VGR.com. Once again, I am Jacob Smith.
And I'm Matt Morgans.
And we will see you next week.